It never starts with shouting. It starts with a shrug, a smirk, a sentence that seems harmless, but it leaves something unsettled in you. You replay it later and realize it was not harmless. It was dismissive. Someone told you to relax when you were speaking from your truth. Someone laughed off your idea in a meeting. Someone looked at your hurt and said you were too sensitive. And in that moment, something inside you shrank. Not because you were weak, but because you were being asked to carry someone else's discomfort with your clarity. Dismissiveness is not always loud. Often, it wears the mask of humor, politeness, even charm. That is why it is so dangerous. You begin to question yourself instead of questioning the disrespect. You wonder if you really did overreact. You second-guess your boundaries, and slowly you begin to pull back. You stop raising your voice, not because you found peace, but because you learned silence feels safer than being brushed off again. But what if it did not have to end there? What if you had the language to respond without exploding? What if you could meet that smirk with grounded confidence? What if you could turn dismissiveness into a moment of truth, not tension? This is not about clapping back. It is about calling something up, calling up your self-worth, calling up your right to be heard, because the goal is not to fight back louder. It is to stand taller with words that restore your presence. In this episode of Daily 1% Impact, we are going to explore how to recognize the subtle ways people dismiss you and how to speak with quiet authority that demands respect without ever raising your voice. You do not have to become aggressive to be assertive. You do not have to mirror their attitude to protect your peace. You just have to understand the power of intentional words. Because when you speak from self-respect, you stop reacting to their behavior and start responding from your values. And that changes everything. There is something particularly frustrating about being hurt by someone's words only to be told it was just a joke, as if your reaction is the real problem, not their behavior. As if your feelings are inconvenient facts they would rather erase with a punchline. This is not humor, this is evasion. And it places all the emotional responsibility on you while the other person walks away smiling. You end up carrying both the sting and the shame. But there is a different way to hold that moment. You do not need to match their sarcasm. You do not need to laugh to keep the peace. You simply need language that reclaims your presence. One of the most effective ways to respond is short and firm, not sharp, just grounded. You can say, then make it funnier. That single sentence does not raise your voice, it raises the standard. You are not arguing about whether it was a joke. You are inviting them to be better at connection, better at intention, better at responsibility. Or you could say, find new material. It is not dramatic, it is not cruel, it is clear. It tells them you will not reward lazy humor that disguises disrespect. When you use phrases like these, you are not asking for validation. You are drawing a line. And lines drawn in calm confidence tend to hold more power than lines drawn in emotional chaos. Some people may respond with discomfort. That is okay. Discomfort is part of growth. You are not responsible for how they feel about your boundaries. You are responsible for holding them with consistency. When someone says just joking and you feel that sinking sensation in your gut, that is your signal, not to attack, but to anchor. That moment is not a test of your cleverness. It is a test of your clarity. And here is what matters most. Your response is not for them. It is for you. It is a message to yourself that you will not abandon your dignity for the comfort of others. It is a reminder that protecting your peace is more important than keeping the moment light. Because sometimes the moment is not meant to be light. Sometimes it is meant to be honest. In some cases, the person might not realize they crossed the line. That is when your tone matters just as much as your words. You can say it with a half smile, but your eyes should stay steady. You are not trying to win. You are trying to teach, even if they never learn. Because every time you stand in your truth, you learn something about yourself. And if you find yourself in a space where these jokes happen often, it is worth asking what kind of culture you are surrounded by. If disrespect is always cloaked in humor, it might be time to ask whether Your presence belongs somewhere that honors more than just a laugh. You were not made to tolerate what chips away at your worth. You were made to carry yourself with a level of self-respect that no one else gets to edit with a shrug and a smile. So the next time someone says just joking after they hurt you, remember this: you do not need to prove how much it hurt. You only need to prove to yourself that you are not afraid to name what matters. That is what real strength sounds like. One of the most common ways people try to distance themselves from the impact of their words is by saying, "Don't take it personally." On the surface, it might sound like advice, a suggestion to let things go. But underneath it is a subtle shift in blame. It places the responsibility for discomfort on your interpretation rather than their delivery. It frames your reaction as the problem, not their lack of care. And that is where the damage begins. When someone says, "Don't take it personally," what they often mean is, "I do not want to be accountable for how my words landed." They want to preserve the illusion of neutrality while dismissing the very real emotional consequence of their communication. But human interaction is personal. That is what makes it powerful. You do not get to remove yourself from the equation just because you regret the impact. You do not get to protect your intent while disregarding how it felt to someone else. So, how do you respond without becoming defensive or losing your sense of control? One option is to reclaim agency with a simple phrase like, "That feels personal to me." You are not accusing, you are stating. You are naming your experience without needing their permission to feel it. Another option is to say it differently. This puts the responsibility back where it belongs, on the person speaking, on the structure of their words, on the way they showed up in the moment. This is not about escalating conflict. It is about refusing to silence yourself for the comfort of others. Because when someone tells you not to take it personally, they are often trying to avoid the discomfort of having made something personal. You are not overreacting. You are responding to the weight of meaning behind the words, and your feelings are not up for debate. It takes maturity to acknowledge how your words might land. It takes humility to accept that your tone, timing, or choice of language might not have been. But when someone skips that and goes straight to "don't take it personally," what they are doing is skipping growth. They are choosing defensiveness over responsibility, and you do not have to follow them there. In those moments, keep your voice low and your posture grounded. You are not trying to convince them of your pain. You are trying to show yourself that you are worthy of self-respect, even when others try to dismiss it. You can say, "I hear that, and I also hear myself." It is not about being right. It is about being real. It is about staying connected to what is true for you, even when someone tries to rewrite your reality. Some people will never apologize. They will never say, "I could have said that better." But that does not mean you have to carry the burden of interpretation. You are not required to shrink your truth just to keep the atmosphere light. The air may stay calm, but your soul will grow heavy. And eventually that weight will show up somewhere. In your silence, in your withdrawal, in your resentment. You were not made to carry what was never yours. You were made to stand in your experience with gentleness and strength. You were made to express without exploding, to clarify without criticizing, and to respond without fear. So when they say, "Don't take it personally," hear what they are really saying, and then decide with intention how you want to hold that moment. Because you can take back the power without taking on the pain. That is what emotional maturity looks like. Not louder, just clearer. Don't be so sensitive. It sounds like advice, but it lands like a shutdown. When someone says it, what they are really doing is making you responsible for their discomfort. They are telling you that your reaction is the problem, not their behavior. They are not inviting conversation, they are ending it. With that one sentence, they redefine the entire exchange. Suddenly, it is not about what was said, but about how you handled it. And that is a trap. Sensitivity is not a flaw, It is not a weakness. It is a signal. It tells you what matters. It tells you what crosses the line. And most of all, it tells you where your values are being ignored. When someone tries to silence that signal, they are not making you stronger. They are making you smaller. They are asking you to edit yourself so they can avoid reflection. That is not growth. That is control. But here is the truth. You do not owe anyone a version of yourself that feels less. You do not need to become hardened to be respected. You do not have to shut down your instincts just to be accepted. Sensitivity, when rooted in self-awareness, is a strength. It allows you to feel deeply without drowning. It allows you to notice the subtleties others miss. It allows you to walk through the world awake. So what do you say when someone throws that line at you? First, pause. Let the comment land without letting it define you. Then respond with clarity, not defensiveness. You can say, I care about things that matter. Or sensitivity is part of how I lead. Or simply, I would rather be sensitive than unaware. These are not attacks. They are statements of self-respect. You are not trying to win the moment. You are trying to hold your ground without letting your spirit bend. There is also power in curiosity. You can ask, what makes you say that? Not in a sarcastic tone, but in a grounded one. This shifts the dynamic. It asks the other person to own their words, to examine the reason behind their reaction. And often people speak without realizing what they are actually saying. When you hold up that mirror, without accusation, you invite reflection, even if it is uncomfortable. And sometimes silence is the loudest answer. When someone says you are too sensitive and you simply look at them with steady eyes, you are communicating something deeper. You are saying, I am not here to play small so you can feel big. I am not here to hide my depth so you can avoid your own. That silence speaks volumes, not because it withholds, but because it honors. Remember this. The people who tell you not to be so sensitive are often the ones most afraid of being seen. Your sensitivity touches something they have buried. Your reaction unsettles something they cannot name. But that is not your burden to carry. You are not here to manage their discomfort. You are here to live with integrity. So hold your sensitivity close. Treat it not as something to suppress, but as something to steward. Because when you own it fully, no one can use it against you. You stop apologizing for your intuition. You stop explaining your reactions. You stop editing your essence. And that is when everything shifts. There will be moments when someone looks you in the eye and says, that's not what happened, or you're overthinking it, or worse, I think you're making something out of nothing. And in that moment, it does not matter how composed you were. It does not matter how calmly you spoke. You feel it. That sting of being told your experience is invalid. That what you felt, saw, or sensed has no place in the conversation, and slowly you begin to question yourself. This is emotional dismissal in its most subtle form. It does not raise its voice. It does not need to. It chips away at you by making you believe your internal world is not trustworthy. But here is the truth. People who dismiss your feelings are often afraid of their own. When you show clarity, they feel exposed. When you express, they feel cornered. And instead of listening, they choose to shrink the moment. So how do you respond without falling into defensiveness? You stay present, you breathe, and you hold your ground with quiet strength. You do not need to convince them of your feelings. You just need to confirm them to yourself. You can say, I do not need you to agree. I just need you to understand that this matters to me, or this is how it felt from my side, and that matters. These phrases do not escalate, they stabilize. They show you are not backing down, but you are not attacking either. Sometimes the best way to reclaim power is to stop debating your reality. When someone tries to rewrite your emotions, you simply stop playing along. You do not argue, you reflect. You can say, let's pause. If we cannot honor how I experience this, we are not having a real conversation. This does not accuse, it invites. It tells the other person there's a different way forward, but only if both people show up with respect. You are not asking for permission to feel. You are claiming the right to speak from a place of truth. And when you do that consistently, people begin to adjust. Not always willingly, but undeniably. Because when you stay grounded in your inner clarity, you become harder to dismiss and impossible to shake. Holding the emotional frame is not about control, it is about clarity. When you stop handing over your emotional authority to people who refuse to understand, you begin to lead every interaction from the inside out. During a critical meeting at her company, Tracy, a young yet composed manager, was presenting a new proposal. Midway through her explanation, an older colleague interrupted her with a so-called joke that cut deep. He said she was being emotional and added that maybe she was on her cycle, laughing as if it were clever. The room went silent. It was a short moment, but it stripped the space of respect. Tracy felt hurt. But instead of reacting, she calmly stood up and left the room. No raised voice, no need to explain herself, just a pause to regain control. A few minutes later, she returned. With the same calm energy, she looked directly at the man and said in a steady and composed voice, "If you continue speaking that way, this meeting will end. I am willing to continue if you are." No one said a word, but something shifted. She did not make a scene. She did not pretend it never happened. She did not lash out or shrink down. She simply showed up with presence and clarity. She did not try to prove herself. She just made it clear where her boundaries were, and that changed the room. The truth is, no one can make you feel small without your permission. No one can take your calm if you know how to protect it. And no one will continue to dismiss you when you learn to turn silence into strength. In a world that often confuses noise with courage, it is those who can stay composed and speak when it matters who lead with true power. This is what it means to lead from within, to choose grounded strength over emotional chaos, to hold your space not by force but by clarity. When you do this consistently, others begin to adjust because people notice when you respect yourself without needing to raise your voice. There will always be people who speak without care, who choose to dismiss rather than understand, but the most important voice in the room will never be the loudest one. It will be the one that refuses to give away its truth for the comfort of others. You do not have to fight to be heard. You only have to speak from a place that is rooted, steady, and real. Respect begins when you decide to stop chasing it, when you stop explaining what should be obvious, when you hold your own space with quiet conviction. That is where your power lives. Not in the reaction, but in the response. Not in domination, but in clarity. You were never meant to shrink to make others feel comfortable. You were meant to grow into the kind of person who makes presence felt without forcing it. That takes work, that takes practice, but it is possible. One breath, one moment, one choice at a time. If this message spoke to you, share it with someone who is learning to stand taller. And if you are ready to go deeper, to grow stronger in how you speak, lead, and live, subscribe to this channel. This is Daily 1% Impact, where we choose progress over perfection, presence over noise, and clarity over chaos, because your voice matters. And when you use it well, you will not just command respect, you will inspire it.